I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over. And Rebecca Makkai, I have been looking forward to this conversation for so long because I'm sorry, I have to do it. I have some questions for you. I know you're going to hear that so
I know.
We're taping pre-pub, so I'm hoping I'm getting the terrible pun out of the way because this novel is so good. I have some questions for you. Can we talk about where this book started and Bodie Kane?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the way I have been describing it is it's a literary feminist boarding school murder mystery, everyone's favorite genre.
Mm-hmm.
I live on campus of a boarding school. I don't teach here, my husband does. Part of the deal is that for most faculty, you live on campus and that, your housing is covered, which is amazing. So we lived here for quite a while. And I was always going to write a boarding school novel. That was always going to happen. I originally was like, I won't write it until, 2045. I'll wait until everyone's retired. But it just kept getting ideas for a story and particularly for the layers of history that a place like this encapsulates, the way that people pass, it's a very permanent place, but it's one that people pass through very quickly. And yet at one of the most formative times of their life.
Right.
And then the idea of someone revisiting that space. Very early on, it was going to be a mystery because, books are always either asking questions about the future, suspense, thriller, what happens next, or the present, like what's going on right now, or the past. And because of these layers of history, this idea of boarding school, I wanted it to be questions about the past. When you ask questions about the past, that's pretty much a mystery. And then I decided to take that really literal, and it really is a murder mystery. But it's certainly not just a whodunit, and it's definitely not like a lady detective with her cat knitting, that which I love those. I see those and oh, that sounds so relaxing and wonderful to read. It's different than that, but it is a murder mystery.
Bodie Kane is a film professor and a podcaster, a thing that didn't even exist, when she was first enrolled as a student at this prep school. I mean, professor, sure, but podcaster, what?
Right.
But Bodie is sort of the ultimate outsider. She is never expected, Indiana to begin with, but she never expected to be at a place like Granby.
Right.
So where did Bodie come from? I get the idea of starting with the school and the bigger concepts, but she's got a really interesting voice.
Yeah, it took me a long time to figure her out. There are, I know so many writers, brilliant writers who start with character and they get a vibe, they hear a voice, and then they have to think about what this character is going to get up to. And I'm the opposite. I start with scenario.
Okay.
And then this always makes me sound psychotic, but I reverse engineer my perfect victim, essentially. Who we get into this mess, who's going to be most changed by this mess, who's most vulnerable to these circumstances, who's going to act in ways that we couldn't maybe predict. And it was a lot of searching around to find this person. I settled on someone she was an outsider at this school, but not as much as she thought she was.
Right.
Which is so often the case, right? It's anyone. And no one says, oh, I was really popular. Everyone thinks they were an outsider. And she was maybe more than plenty of them, but definitely not the only one. And she's someone who, her work in film and her podcast, it's about the abuses of women in early Hollywood. She's someone who, as an adult, critically has been thinking about these structures of power, about sexism, about racism also, but has not yet been able to turn back and examine her own past with that same critical eye.
Right.
And think about the structures she was part of, even as she thought she was an outsider, but she was actually part of these structures. This murder that occurred when she was a senior, she starts to realize, and this is, slightly a spoiler, but it's a very, very early spoiler. It's the premise of the whole book. Starts to realize that it was probably solved incorrectly and perhaps the wrong person is in prison. So I needed someone who maybe was trained in that way of thinking, but had not yet turned that same eye on her circumstances and on this case that was much closer to home.
You cover so much ground without really leaving the campus of this prep school. I mean, I don't want to say it's a locked room mystery, you know, that is a very specific thing, but
Right.
you do a lot on a very small campus. And it's kind of
Yeah.
wild the way you're moving back and forth in time. I mean, obviously, there are some folks from her past who are encountered and some folks who are not.
Mm-hmm.
But how did you know when you had the structure for this story?
Right. Well, I didn't at first, for sure.
Okay.
I wanted
Okay.
a sort of a hothouse novel. I love those where
Mhm.
we have a limited
Right.
setting and a limited cast. I have joked, and I'm not even joking, that my entire career has just been trying to rewrite The Westing Game by Ellen Raskin, which was my favorite book as a kid.
Okay.
Just like everyone's in this one building, and oh my god, it snowed, and one of them's a murderer. I think I'm not alone in that. I think a lot of writers around my
Mhm.
our generation
Yep.
was one of their favorites. Originally, the story was going to be this bunch of high school classmates has had to reconvene for a retrial,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
they're all staying in the same hotel. They're not really supposed to talk to each other, but they're all here. It's a really
Mhm.
weird high school reunion. And that was the first stuff that I wrote. I sat down and I wrote this scene of Bodhi arriving at this hotel,
Okay.
and this case already being really famous, and all this stuff already having happened. I realized quickly that there was just so much backstory to get in. Not only what had happened in 1995, but what had happened several years earlier to get us to this
Mhm.
place. So I felt like, okay, I'm going to back up a little. The moment where she got involved, and maybe
Mhm.
she's going to go back to the school. She's going to be teaching this little 2-week class, revisiting her old stomping grounds for the first time. I'll, see how much time I need to spend there before I can get to the real story. And of
Okay.
course, that turned into 3/4 of the book. Her time back on this campus. So what I thought was going to be a prologue, whoops! But it was, of course, then at a certain point very intentional to go, no, no, no. This is the gravity. This is where the weight of the book is. I'm still going to have that strange, everyone packed in a hotel, but that's going to be the final act. That's going to
Mhm.
be, what everything leads up to. So at that point, things came together, but things change, constant changes all the way through. You don't know that you have the final structure until
Mhm.
it is out of your hands and your editor goes, okay, no more changes. They're going to get really upset with you if you mess up the pagination. Stop. And then you're like, I guess that's the final form.
Great Believers was 2018.
That's right.
You and I are talking now in January of 23.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just a few weeks away, obviously, from the release. If I have some questions for you. So, how long then were you with Bodhi and her
Right.
classmates on campus?
Right. So I think of it as a marination phase. I have this really
Uh-huh.
long kind of stewing on a book
Mm-hmm.
before I start to write. And I could not even begin to calculate when that started for this
Okay.
book. Just, individual thoughts, going way back, taking my kids over to swim in the campus pool when they were toddlers, and like all the lights were off, but it's lit in this beautiful way from the windows, and it's kind of creepy, and thinking, this is where something, when I finally write a boarding school novel, there's something, it's all about the swimming pool. That was years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know that the first time I really sat down and started typing, which is its own specific moment, was April of 2019.
Okay.
I was at Ragdale, the wonderful storied artists colony near Chicago, not far from me. Magical place. Like you walk in the door
Yep.
and you inhale the air, and you're like, I'm ready to make something. And things were still happening for the Great Believers.
Right.
I was in that room at Ragdale when I found out I'd been a Pulitzer finalist. And
Mm-hmm.
did not write that day. We got drunk on Prosecco at 10 a.m. Me and everyone else who was there. It was great. That was still very much part of my world, as it still is. The Great Believers just still with me so much. So yeah, I would say, 2019, really, really writing, but definitely I'd been thinking, taking notes, planning for a couple of years before that. So it's been a while. I've been living with this woman. Yeah.
I have to say, at first, I didn't realize exactly how unreliable Bodhi was going to turn out to be. And the journey, as it were, is really fun. I flew through the pages in a way that I didn't with The Great Believers. And I think it's combination of material,
Right.
but also Bodhi, because I wanted to know what her deal was. And part of it, so her soon-to-be ex-husband, which I'm not giving, I am giving nothing away there.
Right.
He has a Me Too moment.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be a point too for Bodhi, where she really starts to say, hey, wait a minute. Hey, wait a minute. And I don't want to suggest that you're writing in real time. I mean, the novel is its own world and everything else, but you do a very cool thing throughout. I pinged on sort of page 62 and 63, and I just want to use that as I just needed an example for you. But the way Bodhi talks about sort of cases in the ether and what's been happening. Oh no, that's the girl with the football team. That's the da 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 da. And it's a really great device. Do you happen to have a copy of the book handy? Can I ask you to?
I do. Well, that's a good question. Yes, I do. I have one and only one copy of this book because I haven't gotten it finished. This is my one advanced copy.
I've destroyed my galley because that's how I
love it.
read. Can you just read? It's sort of from the second graph, and
oh yeah,
I really would like to spend a few minutes on that, but it's so great.
I can read this, yeah. And there it was, the reason Jerome had warned me off the internet. Anderson Cooper, with new developments on a story I'd found particularly disturbing. It doesn't matter which story. Let's say it was the one where the young actresses said yes to a pool party and didn't know. Or no, let's say it was the one where the rugby team covered up the girl's death and the school covered for the rugby team. Actually, it was the one where the therapist spent years grooming her. It was the one where the senator, then a promising teenager, shoved his dick in the girl's face. She was also a promising teenager. It was the one where the billionaire shoved the woman into the phone booth, but no one believed her. The one where the high school senior was acquitted of rape because the sophomore girl had shaved her pubic region, which somehow equaled consent. Oliver asked if I was hungry, and I shrugged. It was the one where the woman who stabbed her rapist with scissors was the one who ended up in jail. It was the one where the star had a secret button to unlock the doors. It was the one where the harasser ended up on the Supreme Court. It was the one where the rapist ended up on the Supreme Court. It was the one where the woman shaking testified all day on live TV and nothing happened. So yeah, these were things. Obviously, some of these are ones that you can draw connections to real stories. A few of them I've invented. Or changed enough that it's really not the same thing anymore. So here's how that came about, because this is a sort of a motif that recurs throughout the book. This case that she's watching that is somehow all cases at once. This was a solution to a problem for me. I wanted there to be something on TV because we were, it was 2019 and there was just constantly something, old cases, new cases, things coming out that were shaking us up. And I wanted her to be watching something like that. I wanted that to be in the background, upsetting her. I didn't want to pick one real case and have that be the focus. And I did not want to invent a case and have to build this whole thing. And the point is, I don't need to invent these because there's so many real ones. So I just decided it was going to be all of them. Even, in this case, she's saying, yeah, let's say it was this one, but in other scenes, I actually have other characters talking about these cases, but they're saying completely contradictory things because they're talking about all of them at once. So this conversation can't possibly have happened. The rest of the book is very realistic, but there are these moments where it's like, yeah, it's just a mess. Let's just say that it was all of these things at the same time. It's weird to say I had fun with that, but it was a very cathartic way of writing. I'll say that.
It's a great device. And I don't mean to belittle the content by describing it as a device, but as a literary device, it really works. It keeps you centered in the story, and the overwhelming sort of, I don't want to say it's not chaotic for Bodhi, but it's clear that she has told herself some things that she may not have the evidence to back up. And but the idea that so much is in the ether and so much is happening, one of the kids that she's working with on campus, this girl, Britt, she's a really great character. But at one point too, she says to Bodhi, you know, I'm not okay with true crime podcasts. I'm not okay with essentially the homework assignment. And yet she ends up essentially creating a true crime podcast for her homework assignment. But I think, you know, this is part of the larger conversation we need to be having about how we treat information like this. I think there was a moment too, you know, where the families of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims were just like, why is this a television? Why are you doing? We have made this very clear. We don't want to be part of it. And it's as if the narrative continues, and it's like these women don't even get to have their own bodies after something terrible has happened.
Right. Yeah. It's, you know, I'm certainly, while this book does take, you know, partake of the kind of, you know, the genre, the tropes of a crime novel, it's fundamentally not true crime because it's fiction. And people, it's funny, people keep asking me like, well, you wrote this true crime novel, but it's literally fiction. It's the opposite of true crime. It is fake crime, but it certainly is concerned with true crime. The premise, you know, of the novel, once you've suspended your disbelief, is this is a murder that has captured the public's imagination. This is something where the family and the witnesses and the man who's in prison have absolutely lost control of the narrative because it belongs to the public now. And what does that mean? Right. And there's what does it mean for the victim's family, which is, you know, maybe sidelined a bit here, but certainly part of the story. What does it mean for these kind of secondary characters, you know, in this thing where there are people who really didn't know much, but they got elevated into this role in this case. And then there are people who actually knew more than they thought they did, but because they weren't centralized in the telling of the story, they assume that their information is not valuable. And that includes Bodhi, who all along has had some information that was probably incredibly important. My job is to complicate things. You know, my job is not to serve up an easy easy listening hits here. You know, I'm taking that question of true crime, that question of the armchair detective, that question of internet sleuthing, all those things, and like let's really look at this realistically. Let's really look at what this means for the people involved.
I have to say, I really like Bodhi as a character. There were a couple of times where I was like, oh, you did. Okay, you did that. Okay. And I mean, again, it is part of the fun. And I don't want to make light of the ground that you're covering in any way, shape, or but following her and watching her evolve and come to terms. And there's an internet sleuth, let's call him.
Right.
That she ends up sort of connecting with in a way that I never would have expected. But it was a great moment when it happens because you know exactly why she's doing it and you know she believes why she's doing it, and yet this is a dude she's been making fun of for a while, but she's like, you know what, this makes sense. I'm just gonna do it. And I think certainly I so appreciate the fact that she's messy. She's just like, she's messy and she's real and she's kind of great, and she doesn't have terrible intentions. She's just human and messy, and her life is, you know, not maybe what she predicted it was going to be.
Right. So you were calling her an unreliable narrator, and I agree. But here's my contrary argument.
Okay.
I think she is a tremendously reliable narrator in that she admits what she doesn't remember. Because the lie of most fiction, and it's a lie I'm happy to partake in, you know, so much of the time is, yeah, let me tell you what I remember. You know, here's what happened 15 years ago. And it's a perfect chronological memory. Like, and then this person said this, and then he glanced to the side, and then he said this, and then this happened. That's not the way memory works. That's not at all the way memory works, right? And what I wanted to do here, I wanted to trap her in the present. I did not want to let the narrative fly us back in time to see what really happened. And I didn't want to let her memory be this kind of magic fictional suspension of disbelief memory where it was like, I picked up the pen and I was back, I was there, 1920s Brooklyn, here's exactly what happened. So she's being as honest with herself and with her kind of audience, which is a strange audience in her head for who she's talking to, as honest as she can be about what she remembers, what she doubts, what she questions. And so basically she's highlighting her own unreliability.
Right.
In a very, I think, in a very honest way. So not so much about deception as it is about sometimes withholding, right? Protecting certain information, and about owning the fact that we're all hugely unreliable narrators.
No, I definitely agree with you on her honesty when it comes to what I don't know. But the way you reveal these bits is really satisfying. It's just so satisfying for the reader because, I mean, there are moments in the book where I would say there were choices you could have made, and I'm dancing a little delicately here, but some other writers might have made different choices with some points that happen in the book, and I was just like, oh no, okay, here we are. A couple of characters who show themselves as adults to be slightly unexpected. There's a woman who shows up very sort of towards the end of things, and there's another classmate who, I was saying to you before we started taping, I was like, oh yeah, that guy.
You're not a fan.
No, but I mean, but I understand the POV, and I understand how that character would end up in that place. But at the same time, was I rolling my eyes at him? Yes, I was rolling my eyes at a fictional character. I was like, dude, no. Of course. It was just a really satisfying reading experience. And again, this whole hothouse, tiny cast, one location, and the way you're jumping back and forth in time without the magical pen. I thank you for not doing thank you for not. Suddenly I saw the photograph and I was transported back to 1995. I mean, there are great pop culture moments in this. There are great sort of class moments that and literally meaning not educational class, but class. And
no,
all of these, you just do these things in little drops, and then suddenly we get to the next bit. But can we talk about your literary influences for a second? Because there's a lot happening in this book in a lot of great ways. The way you handle time, the way you handle memory, the way you handle, revelation and all of that. But I feel like a lot went into this book that we don't necessarily see.
Yeah, I mean, influence is a really funny question for me always because I obviously, like every writer, I'm a huge reader. I was a huge reader as a kid onward. I know the moments for me where I read something and went, oh my God, that just blew me away. I didn't know you were allowed to do that. But it's very hard for me to trace from there into my own writing. Because the last thing I want to do is copy, right?
Right.
But obviously, I'm writing a novel because other people have written novels. I'm structured, of course, I'm steeped in influence. It's just really hard for me to sort that all out. I do love books, like we said earlier, that had that kind of that contained cast that was in place that one time, right? I love that. And I love books that yank you around a little bit in terms of structure, in terms of truth. So I see, because I've been checking out your books the whole time. I see Trust by Hernan Diaz.
Oh, love.
You're like, what?
Love what he does in that book.
Right? Can't claim that as an influence because I read it like 3 weeks ago. Right? But what a book, right?
Right.
So, books that do that. My favorite Jennifer Egan novel is the one no one has read. It's called The Keep. And
sorry, I've read that. No. You and I can sit in the corner. I love that book.
Oh my God.
I mean, the thing is, I will read anything she writes.
Well, yes.
I will follow her anyway because I trust what she's doing. And I have to say, the first time I saw the copy for The Keep, and I had it in Galley a million years ago, and I looked at it and said, okay, Not entirely sure what's happening here, but I will do it because it's
it.
her and I trust.
Yeah,
Completely.
that's it. That's it. You know, and that's one where you go, I can't believe you got away with that. Oh my God. I can't believe that worked. That's not supposed to work.
Yep.
Structurally, and do I believe this person? And then also managing to tell an incredibly suspenseful story.
Right.
It's not just a gymnastics routine, you know, which is the risk that people run when they get fancy with their narratives. It's like, all right, yep, I can see you do the double backflip. Great, 10 points, awesome. Okay, but there's no like, where's my story, man? And that one does it. And so, you know, there's that. I'll say the other, I think the greatest influence on my writing is the fact that I taught elementary school for 12 years, taught Montessori elementary school, and I read aloud to those kids for half an hour every school day. And it's not so much a matter of what I read them. I can't say like, oh, Charlotte's Web is my biggest influence or something. It was a matter of visceral reaction from those kids and my instantaneous feedback on what bored them and what worked, what was confusing, what was dragging. You know, the moments where just to save the class, I needed to like summarize the next 3 pages for them because they don't want to read a description of the woods. We're just going to move on. That was an unparalleled literary training. It was really that I don't have an MFA. That was my MFA. Just, you know, oh, this, you know, this is dragging and this kid has just gotten the craft scissors and is cutting the hem of their pants. Like, I can see that this is not working. It partly was about, you know, lessons about pacing, lessons about momentum, but it was also it instilled in me an absolute terror of boring people. Like as a writer, you know, I can feel when someone would be getting bored. I know when this is going on too long. I know when you need some plot. I'm very easily bored. I've got ADHD. I need like constant something. Give me some stimulation, right? And that's part of it too, for sure. If you can count that as a literary influence.
Yeah, totally. Because also you've done enough live events where you know when you sort of start to lose the audience.
Oh yeah.
And you know, you can change the pace of the event very, very quickly. Or, you know, sometimes you get an audience that just wants to stay and you're like, okay, I'm gonna take I'm gonna take this extra 10 minutes that I would not otherwise have because clearly you are here and I have not heard a single rustle. I have not seen a single person scoot in their chair. It's wild when
Or
that
they're
happens and it's
laughing, they're
just
doing
like,
the thing. Yeah.
oh, I would very much like to be part of this. You know, I partially asked too because as I was researching, you know, and doing my thing before we sat down, you love Julie Otsuka's The Buddha in the Attic the way I love Julie Otsuka's Buddha in the Attic. And so any chance I get to talk about Julie Otsuka's work with another human being, I'm just like, hi, can we just rave about Julie Otsuka for a second? Because what she does with voice.
Oh my God.
In that book and structure and story and all of the things. And she does it, of course, in, you know, 160 pages because she's Julia. She can do this.
Talk about getting away with things that you would not think you could get away with. And I have the hardest time, you know, I mean, my enthusiasm convinces people to read that book. But what do you say? You're like, it's a book. There are no characters. There's no story. It's really good, which sounds to me like my nightmare read, right? Like I just said, I need stuff. I need story. So you say, okay, well, it's about Japanese immigrants to California, and it's, you know, that's something. But you can't explain that book. You just have to start reading.
Exactly.
That's all.
And just how you move through the story. I mean, yes, we just said there is no story. Well, there is a story. It's just the language just pulls you through. And before you know it, you're done.
Right. Yeah.
And I do read really quickly, but I will slow myself down for Julie Otsuka. So again, just an excuse to yell about Julie and her brilliant books.
Yeah. I was talking to my students about what their engines are. Like what, you know, what would make someone turn the pages? What is the momentum here? And if, you know, if it's going to be plot, then okay, let's talk about plot structure. Let's really get in there. What makes the plot go? What moves us forward? If you think you can get away without plot, what are you doing instead?
Right.
Right. And she's a great example. It's like, oh my God, litany, lyricism, voice, there is movement. It's just, poetry. uh, that works. Sometimes it's other things like it's something about structure where it's like a story written like a list, right? And it's not talking about her, but someone else where, okay, maybe I don't need a plot because I have this sort of exoskeleton. There's something else. The students who think that they can not have plot and also not have anything else that is like this incredibly compelling forward movement. That's where it's not going to work.
Yeah, sorry, no, make a choice. Have you had a chance to read The Swimmers?
Yes.
Her last.
Yes.
What she does where it switches where you're in the pool and you're with this community, and then suddenly there's that shift halfway through. And I knew something was coming because that one person, we knew that person's name.
Yep, there's a right.
And just that tiny, tiny bit. And then suddenly we're in the rest of the book. And again, it's 159 pages. So if you haven't read it yet, please just go buy it and read it because it's brilliant.
But again, it's the Julie Otsuka podcast.
Yeah, right. I mean, actually, I can just fangirl for hours. But when you talk about that shift in narrative, that's exactly what you're doing in a lot of ways through Bodhi. I mean, I know I've come back to this, but this idea that you're using all of the different pieces of all of the different cases, whether they're real or imagined, it's such a great way to keep us grounded in the larger pieces of the story. And I so appreciate that. And, I would like to see some art with my art ways. Like some people experience stories in different ways. That's great. But the fact that I have language to hold on to too is a delight for me. And which brings me to the Great Believers a bit, only because Fiona Marcus, who is a big piece, obviously, of the Great Believers, there were moments where I felt like Bodhi Kane and Fiona Marcus sort of sat on a continuum, and not just because you were the writer, but because they're women who are very emotionally compressed in a way, and don't always have space for the rest of the world the way we're told women should always have space for the rest of the world. And, I respect that because, but can we talk about that sort of intersection for you as the writer? I mean, you're coming off of this very big, winner of the Los Angeles Times Prize for Fiction, winner of the ALA, finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, finalist for the National Book Award. A lot happened. You spent a lot of time on the road talking to people about the Great Believers. But can we just talk about the intersection of these women for a second?
Yeah, they definitely, I've had female protagonists before, but there is, you're absolutely right. There is sort of a continuum there of kind of unapologetic women. In Fiona's case, it's interesting. She's someone in the Great Believers. She'd started as just this very secondary character, this young woman in her 20s in the 1980s who was always kind of drunk at the parties. And later on, it was partway into the draft when I realized I wanted her point of view as well. And I wanted a present day point of view. So I went in and kind of plucked her, out of the cast and went, okay, who did this woman turn out to be in her 50s? This woman who lived through this basically war in her 20s and lost everyone. Who is she? She's really got PTSD. She's really living in the past in many ways. She's very conflicted. She's very guilt-ridden and has failed in many ways as a mother and just, a bit of a mess. But she's also someone who will have sex with some guy she found on the airplane, and she's gonna go after what she's looking for. I had a lot of fun with that. Just this, like, I don't have time for your nonsense. I think the same way that for me, thinking about her, I think about where a lot of people get, if they're lucky enough to live into their 80s or 90s, this sort of like, I've seen so much, you can't get to me. I just, and she's only 50 or so.
Right.
But she has lived through so much. She has lost so many people that I felt like I could put her in almost that same place in terms of like oh, you know, none of this is going to touch me. I'm good.
Right.
So Bodhi's younger than that.
Mm-hmm.
She's really, I think, 40 when we first meet her.
Right.
Here.
Right.
And then of course we see her younger self, but we're not there with her younger self.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she's the mother of young kids, but I very specifically did not want to put those kids on the page. They are really not in the story.
Yep.
Despite absolutely everyone in the book constantly asking her who's watching her kids.
Mm-hmm.
Any woman who has traveled for work knows is like, just, you gotta get it 3 times a night, and people might not be meaning to make you feel guilty, but that is the subtext, right? How are you here instead of at home? She's someone who's in the process of reinventing herself very much in this moment. Her marriage is ending. What had been her career starts to end in these 2 weeks when she's back at this school, and she's really, starts to realize that the space she had always been making for other people, the way you put that, the stepping aside, this investigation was going on in 1995, and she figured, I can't possibly have information because I'm not friends with those people. I'm not
Right.
in the right crowd. And instead actually gave the police the only information she thought she could, which turned out to be, possibly wildly misleading to them. But instead going, wait a second, what if I'm not an outsider? No, not only not an outsider to this story, but what if I'm not an outsider to life in general? What if I'm not an outsider to my own life? What if I actually just take center stage here? It was important to me that in high school, she was a theater kid, but she was always backstage. She was tech. She was wearing black. Would not have come on stage for the curtain call. That was not who I was in high school. but like that's the person I needed to make and then change.
Right.
And you start her in a certain place so that these events can transform her.
She really is a great character. Before I ask you though what you're working on next, can we talk about your Substack for a second? Submac.
Yeah.
This is really fun. I'm totally plugging your Substack because it's fun. It's fun. Between the Zillow thing and the books in translation.
Oh.
How are you finding the time on top of everything else?
Okay, so right, I started with Substack. It was only about a month ago, something like that. So it's a newsletter and people can subscribe, and there's a paid version for more stuff, but it's called Submack, so SUBMAKK, because I basically went on Twitter and I was like, who wants to name my Substack? I can't think of anything, and someone suggested it. So, I was always spending a lot of time on social media, not just scrolling, but telling stories. Like, here's an unsolved murder from the 20s that I found, or check out this weird house I found on Zillow, or here's this wild, historical rabbit hole that I went down. I think it's a lot of it's like the part of me that misses teaching elementary school, where I could be like, oh my God, you guys, did you know this thing about Magellan? Like, we need to talk about this. Because I'm sitting alone all day and it doesn't always, if it doesn't fit into my book, who am I going to tell this really cool stuff to? I also started to realize, how unstable things like Twitter really are, and felt like I wanted to, reach people more directly and also, say things in more than 7 words at a time. I've been having a blast. And what's funny is the only time I get writer's block is with emails. I write fiction very fast once I get going. Something like a Substack, I whip those out. I could whip out 7 of them a day if I didn't think people would get sick of me. So it feels very natural. It's a lot of fun. It's the way my brain works. It would have been a 25 tweet Twitter thread, but instead I'm putting it in this slightly more respectable place.
Have you found the books that you were trying to figure out for Eritrea? And there were you're working on the 84 books.
Okay, yeah.
Translation. So that was the question. I was kind of like, all right, where are we going next?
Yes. Okay. So right. But I'm doing this project in honor of my late father. He died in January of 2020, and we'd never had a memorial service. And he was a literary translator, among other things. So I'm reading my way around the world. I'm reading 84 books because he lived to be 84 years old. And someone had already done Around the World in 80 books. So I was like, no, we'll do 84 is more meaningful. I started in Hungary because he was Hungarian. I'm going to end there too. And I just did number 6, which was Greece. And now I'm reading a Turkish novel called Madonna in a Fur Coat. And I haven't actually started it yet. I need to. So yeah, and I'm going to work my way kind of down. I have books picked out for like Palestine, Yemen, Egypt, and then I'm going to work my way down the east coast of Africa next. So I was crowdsourcing a little bit. Crowdsourcing was not terribly fruitful because, and I'm not shocked, but not a lot of people, at least on my Twitter feed, have a great knowledge of African literature.
Right.
So it's something, you know, I have some knowledge, but you know, I feel like then I look at it and it's like, well, God, most of what I've read is Nigerian or South African with a few other things mixed in. You know, what's the greatest thing ever written in Kenya? What's the greatest thing from Eritrea? Like, obviously, these places have deep, deep literatures. So I think I'm going to have to do more Googling unless, God, if anyone, you know, listening to this podcast wants to tweet at me suggestions for, it needs to be in translation, so not written in English.
Right.
But any genre, any year, just something important.
Yeah, I got really stuck on it too because I was sitting down and thinking, and sort of the list I came up with, I was just like, no, actually, none of this is in translation. They're writers I love, and they're great, but I'm like, Abdul Razak Gurnah lives in the UK.
Right.
Born in Zanzibar, love his novels. I mean, he's amazing, but I was just like, yep, doesn't fit the bill. And I'm okay with literature, you know, certainly.
Oh, sure.
We all have our experience of literature and translation, and there's some regions I know really well, but I'm staring at this note in your Substack and I'm going, yikes, I do not have a good answer. So I would love to know what people think too, because I'm just very curious. And I think it also sort of speaks to global publishing, but that's a whole separate conversation. That is a whole separate conversation. But it does bring me to so what are you working on that isn't your Substack?
Oh yeah. Let's just be writing other things, really. No, I am beginning a new novel. I'm at this phase where I definitely think I definitely know what the next novel is, partly because I feel like it's a novel where I feel a political urgency in writing this book. And I have a couple of other ideas that are very compelling to me, but they're ones that could just as well wait. And so there's something that I'm writing, and this is definitely actually not giving it away, but I've been doing a lot of research on the rise of the Nazi Party. I got to go to Germany and do a little bit of research. Anyone picturing what book they think I'm writing, it's not that book.
Right.
So, and it's, you know, it's and it's not, nor is it a Holocaust book, actually. So I am really drawn in. I will say, though, the really intimidating thing is this is the first time that I've hopefully successfully written about the life of a real person. And so it's a very different experience reading biographies and memoirs and being, you know, partly limited and partly liberated by the actual historical record. This question of, well, can I get it right? But then also, well, do I care if I get it right? Is that really the point? Or am I creating a fictional character who has the same name as this real person? So it's giving me fits, and I'm still circling the airplane a little bit on it. It's a lot of notes and research and only a few pages of writing that's really more spaghetti at the wall. That's definitely not going to end up in the actual novel. That's what I'm working on. And what my hope is that by the time I'm really on the road for some questions for you, that I'll be ready to, you know, do some good, solid airport floor writing. I actually write really well on airplanes. You know, like strapped in, and people bring you food, and the Wi-Fi doesn't really work anyway, even if you pay for it. So you might as well. That's some good, and there's like a, you know, very specific time limit. Like you know how much time you have. Yeah,
I love working on airplanes. I love. I get so much done. I get so much reading done. There are people in my life who know that if they see me at dinner, slide me something before I get on a plane, and it will get read immediately.
That's great.
I once actually scared a person sitting next to me because I gave myself the hiccups because I've been holding my breath reading something. And
Oh my gosh.
the woman sitting next to me, because this is back in the day when, you were basically sitting on top of each other. And she just looked at me and was like, no, it's really that great. Sorry, I didn't mean to freak you out.
Sales pitch.
So I don't usually talk to people on planes either because it's work time. It's work time. It's exactly what you said. It's just like you're there. You don't have to think about anything other than what's right in front of you.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
so intrigued by this new book. I realize it's not in a space where you can talk about it yet, but I'm
intrigued. I can tell you after we stop recording.
Oh, I would very much like to know, because here's the thing. I apparently, like Jennifer Egan, I will follow you anywhere. That's really what it comes down to. I mean, listen, we've got the story collection. There were 2 novels, obviously, before The Great Believers, The Borrowers and The 100-Year House, which, if The Great Believers was your first experience of Rebecca, go back, read the stories. If you don't think short stories are your thing, go back and read the stories. I promise you. Lots of clever stuff happens. And, I have some questions for you. I have more questions, but we don't want to spoil it because this is going to air right as the new novel comes out. So, Rebecca Makkai, thank you so much for joining us on Port Over. This has really been a treat.
Thank you. This is a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Hello, readers. It's time for another TBR Topoff. We're going to recommend a couple of books to pick up when you stop in for your copy of I Have Some Questions for You. I'm Mark. I'm coming to you from my Barnes & Noble store in Cincinnati, and I'm joined by my buddy, Jamie. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, Mark. I'm coming to you from my Barnes & Noble store in Leawood, Kansas.
Wonderful. All right, we're going to jump right in. Jamie, if you want to go ahead and get started.
Absolutely. I think arguably one of the draws of I Have Some Questions for You is the setting. You and I have talked. We love the dark academia setting. This elite New England boarding school full of secrets and lies sort of ambiance is fun. And one of my favorite novels that I read last year, it was a spectacular debut novel with a sort of similar vibe to it, was Vladimir by Julia May Jonas. Vladimir is a first-person narrative about a pair of married college professors at a small liberal arts college, and our narrator begins her story as her husband is being investigated for having had inappropriate relationships with his adult, often former, some current students over the years. And it is clear that she really didn't know all the specifics of these relationships. Other than that, she knew they were consensual, ostensibly, which gave her an excuse to not really think about them, or at least not look them directly in the eye. A lot of the book is centered around our narrator's interactions with her students who are of a new guard. She kind of came up on the second wave of feminism, and she thinks of herself as this erudite but approachable English professor. She is a proud but not militaristic feminist, and she thinks of her sort of don't ask, don't tell marriage as very modern, right? She's a mother, she's a published novelist, but she's ultimately not a very successful published novelist. She knows that her writing is not enough to be of real interest to publishers, and she suspects as all of this stuff comes to light that maybe her life hasn't been enough either. And there's a moment where she's just really hurt by a group of students who approach her, these students who she sees herself as their mentor. They approach her and they really object to her silence around her husband's actions, and they think that she should dump him publicly. And her adult daughter also thinks that she's compromised in her life and she's not living the life that she wants, but she's not really sure what life she wants, right? So at this crucial moment, enter Vladimir Vlidinsky. He's a recently published novelist, a junior professor with a beautiful wife, who's getting all kinds of attention for his new experimental novel, and our narrator becomes smitten with Vladimir. She thinks about him obsessively. She orchestrates ways to spend time with him, and she is fascinated by his relationship with his complicated wife. And I should say there is a prologue to this story, which really sets the scene. We learn on page 2 that the narrator is gazing at a sweetly snoozing, I think she calls him Vladimir, who's shackled to a chair in her remote cabin in the woods. So that happens on page 2. And then she backs up and spends the entire novel filling you in on that gap between her husband's allegations and Vladimir handcuffed to a chair. And you are really racing as you're reading to find out how they got there. And along the way, we get to know her intimately. And while she's a little flawed, she's definitely an anti-hero. She's smart, she's funny, and she has this deep inner life that her husband, her daughter, her students do not give her credit for. And so I really loved her. And I'm just going to give a shout out. I know the paperback was just published, but I want to give some kudos to the hardcover version, which had a fantastic and provocative cover of a very fit shirtless guy, sort of shot from the neck down and posed in this seductive pose with a very 80s paperback romance kind of font, right? That just the script that spelled out Vladimir. And I love the juxtaposition really of that kind of silly retro cover with this really fantastic, very modern book. So
good choice. Oh, and you're right. That initial cover, I was like, okay, what is going on here? And very much belies the depth of the book too, which was just a fun extra little piece to throw into the novel. So nice choice. Well, I chose one that was a little strange. I was kind of going in that dark academia vein, and my thoughts kept returning to the novel Vita Nostra. This is a novel put out by Marina and Sergei Dachenko, and it's a weird one, but it was a satisfying challenge. This book dances around with traditional structure. It really plays with narrative in such strange ways, and it just feels so deliciously unorthodox. I'll do my best to try to sum up a little bird skeleton of a plot, so here we go. We follow a young woman named Sasha. She has been recruited to join a mysterious institute in order to expand her learning and her consciousness. From there, insanity ensues. The things that this character has to go through in order to, I think, achieve a higher level of being. She thinks maybe that's what the purpose is. The ride is cuckoo bananas, but in the best way possible. Think Harry Potter done by Tolstoy. Think The Secret History on peyote. It is a book that can alter your perceptions. It is a book that can skewer philosophies while still being able to highly entertain and confound in the best possible way. It's a bizarre story. It reminds me a little bit of something like The House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski. It is strange and seductive, and if you're not careful, it could invite a level of obsession. It is very, very Russian. It is very strange. It is speculative in the best possible way. I've not read anything quite like it, and I think it fits very well into that dark academia genre, while still being able to stand on its own as this strange, wonderful masterwork. So check out Vita Nostra by Marina and Sergei Dachenko.
I am excited because the second book has been translated and is being published in America very, very soon, I think. So another reason to pick it up, because you'll want to know what happens at the end.
Yeah. There are some questions I have, and I want them answered. Well, that is all we have for today. Thanks so much for tuning in to Poured Over. Please make sure to give us a rating and subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can also follow us on our socials at Barnes & Noble. I'm Mark. You can follow my home store at BN Westchester.
I'm Jamie. You can follow my home store at BN Leawood KS.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day. Happy reading. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.